You've been here before, trusting someone completely, believing what they showed you, taking people at face value because that's what decent people do. They extend good faith, they assume the best, they don't walk around treating every human interaction like a threat to be analyzed. And then it happened. Again. The betrayal that came out of nowhere, except when you looked back, really looked back, with the distance that hindsight provides. It didn't come out of nowhere at all. The signs were there, early, consistent, a pattern of behavior that, if you'd known what you were looking at, would have told you everything you needed to know before any damage was done. But you didn't know what you were looking at, because nobody taught you. And that's the thing that nobody talks about honestly. The reason good people keep getting blindsided isn't naivety, it isn't weakness, it isn't some personal failing that makes them uniquely vulnerable to deception. It's a gap in knowledge, a specific, fillable, learnable gap between what people show on the surface and what's actually operating underneath. Every person you've ever met is running two simultaneous programs, the one they want you to see, the curated, managed, socially acceptable presentation of who they are and what they want, and the one they can't fully hide, the behavioral leakage, the micro-expressions, the patterns of action and reaction that reveal, for anyone who knows how to read them, what's actually happening beneath the performance. Most people only ever see the first program. They take the presentation at face value, respond to it as if it's the complete picture, and then get blindsided when the second program surfaces in ways they didn't anticipate. You've been living in that majority. That changes today. There are 9 specific, psychologically grounded techniques for reading what people are actually thinking. Not what they're saying, not what they're presenting, but what's real. And once these 9 things are in you, the world looks fundamentally different. Not paranoid, not suspicious, just clear, the way it should have been all along. Because the people who have always seemed to navigate human nature effortlessly, who never seem surprised by betrayal, who read rooms accurately, who know when someone's lying before the lie is finished, they're not gifted with some mysterious intuition. They just learned what you're about to learn. Before the techniques, you need to understand something about human deception that most people fundamentally misunderstand, because without this foundation, the techniques are just tricks. With it, they become a complete system. The truth about how people deceive and why it's easier to detect than you think. The popular image of deception is a calculated, deliberate performance. Someone who knows they're lying, knows what they want you to believe, and is consciously constructing a false reality for your consumption. And that kind of deception exists, but it's actually the easier kind to detect, because conscious performance produces specific kinds of strain that show up in predictable places. The harder kind, and the more common kind, is self-deception layered on top of other deception. People who have told their own stories so many times in such a self-serving way that they've partially convinced themselves. People who aren't lying in the clean, deliberate sense, but are presenting a version of reality that has been so carefully curated it functions as a lie without the discomfort of feeling like one. Both kinds leave traces, behavioral traces, linguistic traces, physiological traces that the conscious mind can't fully control because they originate in systems the conscious mind doesn't have access to. Your job is not to catch people lying. Your job is to read those traces accurately, to see the complete picture rather than just the presented one. And the 9 techniques you're about to learn are 9 different windows into that complete picture. Technique 1. Watch what they do when they think nobody is watching. This is the foundational technique, the one everything else is built on, and it's almost universally overlooked because it requires patience rather than cleverness. The performance most people maintain in social situations, the managed, curated version of themselves, requires active effort. It requires conscious attention to how they're coming across, what they're revealing, what they're concealing. And like any effortful performance, it degrades when the audience is perceived to have left. Watch people in the moments they think are unobserved, not in a surveillance sense, in the ordinary moments that social interaction produces. The second someone thinks the conversation has ended and they've turned away. The moment in a group when attention has moved elsewhere and they think they're invisible. The way someone treats a waiter, a parking attendant, a person they perceive as having no power or status in the interaction. These moments are unguarded in a way that the moments of direct engagement almost never are. The performance drops, the managed presentation relaxes, and what surfaces in that relaxation is the actual personality operating beneath the social layer. Someone who is warm and engaged with you but dismissive and impatient with a server is not a warm person who has an occasional bad moment. That server interaction, unguarded, unperformed, directed at someone they don't feel the need to manage, is closer to the truth of who they are than anything they've ever said directly to you. The unguarded moment is the most honest information available. Learn to watch for it without making it obvious that you are. Technique 2. Listen for what they never talk about. Most techniques for reading people focus on what they say. This one inverts that entirely, and it's one of the most powerful tools available once you understand the psychology behind it. People talk about what they're comfortable with, what fits the narrative they've constructed about themselves, what they want you to know and think about them. The topics they return to, the stories they tell repeatedly, the aspects of their life and personality they keep in the conversational foreground, those are the things they've decided are safe to share. The things they never mention are equally revealing, sometimes more so. Pay attention to the consistent absences, the subject that keeps not coming up when it logically should, the period of their life that somehow never gets talked about, the relationship, family, former partner, old friend, whose name never surfaces despite its obvious significance. The area of their life where your questions get met with brief, redirecting answers. People don't just hide things they're ashamed of, they hide things they're afraid of, things that complicate the narrative, things that, if examined too closely, would reveal contradictions between who they're presenting themselves as and who they actually are. The silence around those things is not neutral, it's active, it's maintained. And the shape of what's being maintained, the outline of the absence, tells you something significant about what's inside it. But here's where it gets darker than most people expect. Here's where it gets worse. Technique 3. Watch their face in the half-second before they respond. The conscious mind takes time to construct a response, to decide what to say, how to frame it, what version of the truth to offer. That construction process, even when it's fast, creates a gap, a fraction of a second between the moment a question lands and the moment the managed response begins. In that gap, the face tells the truth. Micro-expressions, the brief, involuntary flickers of genuine emotion that cross the face before the social mask reasserts itself, last between 1/15th and 1/25th of a second. They're too fast to fake, too involuntary to fully suppress, and they consistently reveal the actual emotional response to a stimulus before the verbal response has had time to be constructed. What you're looking for specifically is the mismatch, the flash of something, irritation, fear, contempt, calculation, that precedes a verbal response expressing its opposite. Someone whose face shows a brief flicker of anger before they smile and say they're not bothered. Someone whose eyes show a flash of recognition before they say they don't know what you're talking about. You don't need professional training to start reading these. You need to slow down your own attention, to watch the face at the moment of impact rather than waiting for the verbal response, to trust the flash rather than the follow-up. The face in the half-second before the answer is the most honest face you'll ever see. Say this with me. The first expression is always the true one. Here's what most people do when they try to get better at reading others. They focus on learning more signals, more tells, more specific behaviors to catalog and interpret. They build a bigger inventory of things to watch for, as if the problem is a deficit of information rather than a deficit of attention. That approach gets it completely backwards. The people who read others most accurately are not the ones with the longest list of signals. They're the ones who are most present, most attuned, most willing to trust what they're receiving rather than overriding it with what they want to believe. Because here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of all of this. Most of the time, you already know. Something in you already registered the inconsistency, the mismatch, the thing that didn't quite line up. Your instinct already sent the signal. And then your conscious mind, your desire to be fair, your investment in the relationship, your discomfort with the implications of what you sensed, overrode it. The problem was never a lack of perception, it was a lack of permission to trust what you perceived. Technique 4. Ask the question once and then go completely silent. This is one of the most powerful psychological techniques available, and almost nobody uses it because silence feels socially aggressive in a way that most people have been conditioned to avoid. What happens when you ask someone a direct question and then stay completely, comfortably silent after they answer? The social pressure of the silence, the expectation that conversation should continue, that gaps should be filled, that quiet means something is wrong, falls entirely on them. And people who are managing a performance, who are carefully controlling what they reveal, who are giving you the curated version of a story rather than the complete one, they fill the silence. They add things, they qualify, they elaborate in directions they hadn't planned to go. And in that unplanned elaboration, the story starts to develop inconsistencies, details that don't quite match what was said before, additions that feel like corrections rather than expansions. The silence does something else too. It communicates that you're not going to be easily satisfied with the surface version, that you're present enough and confident enough to wait for more. And people who are managing deception feel that communication acutely. The silence reads to them as suspicion, as evidence that what they gave you wasn't enough, and that reading produces its own behavioral response that tells you something. Ask the question, get the answer, say nothing. Watch what happens next. Technique 5. Introduce a false detail and watch how they handle it. This one requires care, and it requires being willing to be slightly uncomfortable with the technique itself, but it is extraordinarily revealing. In a conversation about something you're trying to verify, a story someone has told you, a claim about their past or their actions, introduce a detail that's slightly wrong, not accusatorially, casually, as if you're just confirming what you understood. So this was on a Tuesday, right? When you know or suspect it was a different day. And this was at your old place downtown? When you're not sure of the location. Someone who was there, who has a real, accurate memory of the actual event, will correct you instinctively and immediately. The wrong detail will feel wrong to them and they'll fix it without thinking, because the truth is what they're working from. Someone who is managing a constructed version of events will often agree with your wrong detail, because they're not working from memory of what actually happened, they're working from the story they've decided to tell you, and your detail, plausible, casually offered, gets absorbed into that story without friction. The correction, or the absence of it, tells you which version of the conversation you're actually in. Stop, because I need to say something about everything we've covered so far. These techniques are powerful, and power without ethics is just a different kind of manipulation. The goal here is not to become someone who treats every human interaction as an interrogation, who approaches relationships with constant suspicion, who uses these tools to gain advantage over people rather than to protect yourself from genuine deception. The goal is clarity, the ability to see accurately, to stop being the person who gets blindsided because they were too trusting, too fair, too unwilling to trust what they were already sensing. Use these tools in proportion to the stakes, in situations where something important, your safety, your finances, your emotional well-being depends on reading someone accurately, not as a way of living in permanent suspicion of everyone you meet. The sharpest tools require the steadiest hands. Technique 6. Watch how they treat people they've already won over. This is the long game, and it reveals more about someone's actual character than almost anything else available. People are almost always on their best behavior when they're trying to win something: your trust, your affection, your business, your loyalty. The effort of winning produces a kind of performance that can be remarkably consistent and remarkably convincing. But winning has an end point. And once someone believes they have you, once the outcome they were pursuing feels secured, the effort of maintenance drops, the performance relaxes, and what emerges in that relaxation is the behavior that was always there underneath. Watch specifically how someone treats the people in their life they've already won over: old friends, long-term partners, family members they didn't choose, people they have no ongoing need to impress. That's the preview. That's the version of them that's waiting on the other side of whatever they're currently performing for you. Because what someone does when there's nothing left to win is who they actually are. Repeat after me. How they treat the secured is who they are with the pursued. Now let's put it all together. The final 3 techniques complete the system, and together with the first 6, they give you something that most people spend a lifetime wishing they had: the ability to see people clearly from the beginning, before the damage is done. Technique 7. Notice how they handle being wrong. This one single behavior tells you more about someone's character, about their honesty, their security, their capacity for genuine relationship than almost anything else you can observe. Watch what happens when someone is wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, just ordinarily everyday wrong. When a fact they stated is corrected, when a prediction they made doesn't pan out, when they misremembered something or misjudged something, or simply got something incorrect. People with genuine security and genuine honesty correct themselves easily, without drama, without the need to reframe the error as actually correct from a different angle, or to minimize it, or to redirect attention away from it. They say they were wrong and they move on, because being wrong about a thing doesn't threaten their sense of who they are. People who are performing a version of themselves, who have invested heavily in a particular self-image, cannot do this cleanly. Being wrong feels like an attack on the image, so they defend, they reframe, they explain why they weren't really wrong or why the correction doesn't actually change their original point. They make the correction the problem rather than the error. That defensiveness, the inability to absorb being wrong without it becoming a conflict, is one of the most reliable indicators of the kind of psychological rigidity that produces dishonesty. Because a person who can't tolerate being wrong will do increasingly significant things to avoid it, including lying. Technique 8. Track the gap between their words and their patterns. Single statements are easy to manage. Patterns over time are almost impossible to fake. Most people evaluate others based on what they say, their intentions, their explanations, their reasons for doing or not doing the things that affected you. And words, sincere-sounding, well-constructed words, are extremely convincing in the moment. But words exist in moments. Patterns exist across time. And across time, the pattern almost always tells a different story than any individual statement does. Here's how to apply this practically. Stop evaluating people based on what they tell you about themselves and start tracking what they consistently do. Not what they did once in a difficult circumstance that had context and explanation. What they do repeatedly across different circumstances when the same kind of situation arises. Someone who consistently lets you down and consistently has a sincere, well-articulated explanation for each individual instance, that pattern is the information, not the explanations, the pattern. Someone who consistently shows up, not perfectly, not without occasional failure, but consistently across time, that pattern is also the information. Words tell you what someone wants you to believe. Patterns tell you what they actually are. And the gap between those two things, when it exists, is the most important data point available to you. Technique 9. Pay attention to how you feel after being around them. This is the final technique, and in some ways it's the most important, because it doesn't require any external observation at all. It requires turning your attention inward to something your own body has been tracking the entire time. After you spend time with someone, a conversation, a meeting, a social interaction, how do you feel? Not immediately. Give it 20 minutes, an hour. Let the social performance of the interaction settle. Do you feel energized or depleted, clear or confused, more like yourself or slightly less? Do you leave interactions with them feeling like you've been seen and engaged with honestly? Or do you leave with a low background sense of something you can't quite name, a mild disorientation, a slight flatness, a feeling that something in the interaction wasn't quite what it appeared to be? Your nervous system has been processing that interaction at a level below your conscious awareness, tracking micro-expressions, vocal inconsistencies, behavioral mismatches, the dozens of small signals that don't rise to the level of conscious thought but accumulate into a felt sense of the person. That felt sense, that post-interaction feeling, is data. It's not infallible. It can be colored by your own history, your own wounds, your own projections, but it is real information from a system that has been watching more carefully than you have been able to. When that system consistently produces unease around a particular person, when you consistently feel slightly worse, slightly more confused, slightly more diminished after time with them, trust that. Not as a verdict, as a signal worth investigating. The body knows before the mind admits it. Every single time. Now let's bring all 9 together into something you can actually use. Watch what they do when unobserved. Listen to what they never talk about. Read the face in the half-second before the response. Use silence after the answer. Test with a false detail. Watch how they treat the people they've already secured. Notice how they handle being wrong. Track patterns, not words. And pay attention to how you feel after. 9 windows into the same truth. The truth about who someone actually is beneath the version they're presenting. None of these are foolproof in isolation. All of them together, applied with patience, with presence, with the willingness to trust what you're seeing rather than overriding it, form a system of perception that makes being blindsided almost impossible. Because the people who deceive, who manipulate, who present one face while operating from another, they rely on one thing above everything else. They rely on you only seeing what they show you, only processing the surface, only engaging with the performance rather than looking behind it. You're not doing that anymore. You came into this having been blindsided before, having trusted people who showed you one face and turned out to be another, having looked back afterward and seen the signs that were there the whole time, clear, consistent, unmistakable in retrospect, and asked yourself how you missed them. You didn't miss them because you were weak. You missed them because you didn't know what they were. Now you do. If this gave you something real, if you felt the recognition of a pattern you've been living without the language for, share this, because someone you know is in the middle of trusting someone they shouldn't, ignoring what they're sensing because they don't have the framework to trust it. Give them the framework. The most dangerous person in your life is never the one you're afraid of. It's the one you never thought to read.